Welcome to the Occupational Safety Leadership Podcast, episode number 204. In today's episode, we're going to sit down and continue the journey on incident investigation. We're just going to focus on the information to gather on this one then. Like all things, I wish that when you had something to do, you didn't have a form to fill out right away. You didn't have to, but it's really important that we gather the documentation, we do everything we can, and of course, this obviously will help us as we go through and investigate the incident. But what we don't want lost is just um, any of that documentation. It makes it really hard to get that really good, complete picture out there. So let's just talk about a couple things about what we're going to um, go back and gather up. And some of these I've seen a lot of value in going back and looking at metrics, and other ones I knew that I had to capture it. And in hindsight, we didn't have enough incidents that it made any real difference out there. But let's just talk about some of the stats of the injured employee. So we want to look for things like the age, gender, job title, all that kind of stuff. And sometimes you would have to talk to the HR folks to get that kind of info out there. Next, we want to look at the injury, the severity, the type. We want to look at the body part. I mean, what part of the body was injured? And then hopefully you never have enough incidents, but maybe what you would have is at the end of the year, after X plants, you see four hand injuries, and three of them are on the right hand, and it's the right index finger. That might be an area to go back and say, well, why does it keep happening on these here as opposed to other digits? And of course, it's bad enough that an incident happens, but then we can even peel back the onion more and kind of start to ask those other questions out there. Other things that sometimes factor into the incident: time of day, light, noise, any weather that's happening out there. The one that I like to also sit down and capture: was it the starting of a shift, the end of a shift, the middle of a shift? Just those types of things. I've always been curious, and I've read a lot of papers that talk about as people get more tired, they have more of a chance of making, well, not making, of having a injury. Maybe they start to take shortcuts because they're now tired, not following the procedure the whole way. So, well, we've been kind of curious about that stuff. The actual task performed. So there's a lot of tasks that we can say I operate this machine and I do this and I do that. Uh, but we may not capture 100% what somebody does all day, every day over in the workplace, because that person either was trained to do that and it just wasn't written down. It's just not um, common knowledge out there. But what was the specific task the person was doing at that point in time? Type of equipment. So we want to look at: is it a metal stamping machine? Was the guy driving a dump truck? Like we want to understand exactly what type of equipment is out there, and that will just help us to really understand: was it something that is conveyor belt out there? Just those types of things. And then finally, we want to look at the interim actions that were taken, because it's bad enough that you have an injury, but let's go back and put the interim actions into place, um, until we can solve it for root cause, causal factors, and all that kind of stuff. Then, but there's always some interim steps that we can do and say, all right, we've made it safer. Now let's sit down and really peel back the onion. We've got the documentation. And in other episodes, we'll also talk about forming a team, what that team could possibly look like. Because in an ideal world, you could just say every team should look like the following five people. Well, that may not happen out there. So we want to then go back investigate the incident. It's bad enough it happened. We want to make sure it doesn't happen again. And we also don't want to lose sight of how do we get that person back to work? How do we get that person, because they um, could have some pretty good insight too, and depending upon the injury, they may not be back to work yet, or they could already be back and they're helping out in these gathering the information and all that kind of stuff then. So that is it for today's episode. I want to thank everybody for joining me today. We just talked about not really investigating the incident, but what documentation are we really going to go back and gather the information? Like, what do we need to really get going on this whole thing? So, episode 204 is complete. I want to thank everybody for joining me today. My name is Dr. David Ayers. Thank you and have a safe day.